Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I just want to make sure we have enough time for our speaker here today. So, welcome everyone to our first presentation of the 25-26 Alberti Center Colloquium series. My name is Stephanie Frederick. I'm the Associate Director of the Alberti Center here at the University at Buffalo. I'm really thrilled to be introducing our speaker today. Before we do that, I do just have a couple housekeeping notes that I want to mention before we get started today. So, virtual attendance will be taken via Zoom today. So please, if you could just make sure that the name on your Zoom box matches what we have on our registration list. So you can change your name on Zoom by clicking on the More button next to your name. And if you're watching with a group, if you could just type the names of all of those in attendance in the chat, just so we know everyone that's in attendance today. Um, so today we have about a 60-minute presentation followed by about 15 minutes for questions. If you have questions or comments that you would like to share during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, and one of our hosts will respond to you as soon as possible. If it's more about logistics and things like that, if it's about something related to the presentation or the content, we'll hold those questions until the end, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible during that Q&A portion. And then following the presentation, we will share a link in the chat to do a brief evaluation. We'll send this during that Q&A portion. You will see a certificate of attendance that you can download on the final page of that evaluation. So you do need to complete that evaluation in order to get that certificate of attendance. And your feedback is valued and greatly appreciated. It doesn't take very long, so please take a minute to complete that evaluation if you can. Finally, the slides will be shared on our Colloquium page of our website following the presentation today. Okay, so now I get to introduce our speaker. So Dr. Lydia Laninga-Wijnen is a senior research fellow at the University of Turku, Finland. She established a clear research line on the role of peers in adolescent mental health and behavior, showing that peers are powerful targets for school-based interventions. Lydia is strongly driven to test widely held assumptions that currently inform such interventions. She currently is the PI of the SOLID project, which aims at identifying success factors that optimize the long-term impact of defending. She is also a key collaborator in the Finnish Challenge project, where she examined the effectiveness of targeted interventions. Finally, she was also the recipient of the Alberti Center Early Career Award last year. Today, she's going to be presenting on the risks and rewards of peer defending in bullying situation. So without further ado, I would love to hand it over to Lydia and invite her to share her screen and start her presentation. So welcome, Lydia. Thanks so much for being here virtually.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for this very kind introduction. I will start sharing my screen indeed so that I can start presenting. Let's see. Yes, I hope it's all visible for you now. Thank you so much for this opportunity to provide a presentation about my work. I'm very honored to also receive this early career Alberti prize. It is always very nice if your work is being recognized. And I also feel that it is something that I also should thank my team for. So therefore, I put a picture of my full team because without them, I would not be able to accomplish all the work that I've been doing. So this is the team from the University of Turku. We work at the Invest Psychology flagship. Most of my colleagues focus on bullying research. And today, as Stephanie already told, I will explain more about my own research, which partially focuses on the risks and the rewards of defending. I will first shortly show you some of the areas that I have tapped upon during my career. First, when I did my PhD, the defense was in 2020, I focused really on the role of peer norms in adolescents' behaviors, but also in their friendships. And also like what predicts classroom peer norms over time. So why are some classrooms characterized by aggressive norms where it is really cool, for instance, to behave aggressively towards each other, whereas other classrooms are pretty nice. Then I evaluated the meaningful roles intervention as a postdoc. That's an intervention which aims to promote a positive classroom climate and to diminish bullying. But as you can see, it was in 2020 and 2021. And that was COVID time. So we were not able to evaluate so much, but we at least enrolled the program and I helped rewriting some of the components because we wanted to target it to primary schools. Well, it originally is meant for secondary schools. And then since 2021, I've been the senior research fellow at the University of Turku, where my main research interest is bullying. And yeah, I have a lot of subtopics, but bullying captures it mostly. So with regard to the school bullying research, my research mission is really to combat school bullying worldwide. And I think that a lot of people would share this mission with me. And I'm investigating bullying in Finland mostly. And this is maybe a country that has some specifics that you might want to learn about, because in Finland, the schools have the legal obligation to have an anti-bullying program or protocol. So they often rely on existing anti-bullying programs to fulfill this legal obligation. Over 90% of the schools do that, and they usually go for the Kiva program or OBS. But recent studies from my own group as well have shown that schools largely vary in the extent to which they actually implement these anti-bullying programs, and that this has important consequences for the extent to which it works. So some schools only have the program and barely do something with it, whereas others really follow each and every lesson. Before I will continue sharing some of our work, I think it's good to provide some definition of how we usually assess school bullying. We define it as aggressive behaviors that are intentional and repeated, and also in the context of a power imbalance. So for the victim, it is really hard to defend themselves. And often we first present a definition of bullying to also, for instance, students, so that if we ask them about bullying, that they really know what we mean. And well, as many of you are aware, bullying is a significant problem. Even in Finland, like worldwide, out of 10 children is repeatedly bullied at school, like monthly or weekly. And in Finland, that's 1 out of 9, so still quite problematic. And it is a problematic thing because it causes significant harm to all the children that are involved, especially the victimized children. And anti-bullying programs in the very past, they mostly focused either on victims, they tried to increase the resilience of victims, or they wanted to make them more assertive, or on the bullies. So they really tried to punish the bullies or make sure that their behaviors were not aggressive anymore. But following the phenomenal paper of Christina Salmivalli of 1996, more and more interventions started looking at the full group. So they acknowledged that bullying is a group phenomenon and that bullying often occurs where bystanders are present. And bystanders can take an important role in stopping the bullying situation or helping a victim. So a lot of anti-bullying programs nowadays try to activate these bystanders to either support the victim, so comfort the victim, for instance, or to really stand up for the victim and tell the bully to stop. And they assume that activating these bystanders to do that may decrease the bullying, because the bully may learn like, okay, bystanders don't like my behaviors, maybe I should better stop, because bullying often occurs because people want a higher status among their peers. So if their peers clearly show like, no, I don't like it, then yeah, you better stop bullying. And the defending behaviors may also help victims to cope better with their plight. It might help them to adopt a better appraisals of their situations. It may diminish their self-blame because the defenders show that the bully might be to blame for the situation. And it may also help them to regard their situation as less threatening. Like, okay, there might be a solution. It might stop. It might increase hope, basically. So for these reasons, anti-bullying programs aim to stimulate the defending of victimized peers. And the defending can happen, as I said, in two ways. To just specify it a bit more, on the left side, you see an example of bully-oriented defending, and on the right side, an example of supporting the victim. And we also call that victim-oriented defending, because that is really targeted at the victim, and bully-oriented defending is really targeted at the bully. And today I will talk more about the risks and rewards of these different types of defending, and then the risks and the rewards for, on the one hand, the defender, but also on the other hand, for the victim themselves, because we often assume that the defending helps the victim, but does it really? That's one of the big questions today. So I created a kind of high five of things that I would like to discuss today. The first one is about the defenders. Is it safe to defend victims of bullying for defenders? And then the other the 4 points out of the 5 are really about the victims. So I first want to share some numbers of my project, because in my project I focus on the victim's perspective. Then I will say something more about who is being defended, can bystanders stop bullying, and does defending make victims feel better? So this is the idea of today, and I would like to emphasize that I learned already that a lot of professionals are also now attending this presentation, and it would be really great if we could have like a more interactive talk. So also if you have questions in between, you're free to speak up, as long as the organizers are also fine with that, of course. Because I would also really love to learn about your experiences, and I think that could really bring valuable knowledge to the table as well. So it's not something that I'm only sending out some of my research, but I would love to hear something about your experience. You could also maybe use the chat or anything that would work. Okay, so let's get started. The first key question: is it safe to defend victims of bullying? This is about the defenders. Defending has also been defined as a pro-social risk-taking behavior, because you're taking a certain risk. You don't know exactly upfront what your behavior, what the result will be of your behavior. And there are some potential risks. For instance, if you defend someone, others may start to associate you with the victim, and maybe they will think like, oh, you're not so cool because you're linked to this victim. You also might have a chance to become the next victim of the bully. That's also been shown in some research, that adolescents who defend victims become the next target of the bully of those victims. But there might also be emotional risks of defending. So even if you witness a certain bullying situation, it could still, it could be elevating your distress, because it might be distressing to see somebody being subjected to harmful behaviors of others. There might also be the social risks. If you have like a drop in your popularity because you defended someone who was not so cool, for instance, maybe that also has an emotional effect on you. And also, if your defending did not work out as you hoped for, maybe the bullying did not stop, you might start to question maybe like, okay, what's wrong with me? And it might affect your self-esteem, for instance. So there are reasons to believe that defending could be risky. And should it then be something that we encourage in anti-bullying programs? Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that I think that defending is an important citizen skill. We want a society, at least I suppose, where people stand up for each other, right? If there's unequal treatment or if there's discrimination or anything going on, we want people to take care of each other and to stand up against injustice. So as far as that pertaining to that, I would definitely say like, yes, it is important to also teach children like how we want them to be good citizens of our society. But that may mean that still defending can be a risk and that we should take that into account when encouraging it. Luckily, we also found that defending is typically a safe behavior for defenders themselves. So there are several studies that recently came out, also Sarah Malamud, one of my colleagues, but also myself, in which we examined whether defending was related to victimization over time or to your status over time, or whether it put you at risk of developing emotional problems. And in general, defending was either unrelated to these things, or it was even related to some benefits. So some children who defend others even seem to increase in popularity, for instance. There was one exception with regard to the emotional consequences. If you are a victim who's really low in peer status, so yeah, most children don't like you so much or think you're not so cool, then you have a chance that if you start to defend others that, yeah, you feel emotionally a bit too much engaged maybe, and it could really backfire for you. So your emotional problems may become bigger. So these groups of children, well, maybe for them, defending might be really a risky thing. But on average, yeah, there are no negative effects and maybe some even beneficial ones. Okay, so that was the first point. Is it safe to defend victims of bullying? It seems so most of the time. Then we will turn to the victim's perspective. And I focused on the victim's perspective in one of my projects. And that was the SOLID project, as already been mentioned by Stephanie. And with this project, I really wanted to understand whether it helps victims of bullying if they are being defended, whether it decreases their bullying, and whether it improves their psychological adjustments. And for this, I collected a lot of data. So from 2020 onwards, I collected data 3 times in one academic year. I did that in 2 cohorts. So these are different groups of students. And I eventually had a sample of almost 6,500 Finnish 4th to 9th grade students. On average, they were like 13 years of age. Besides these survey data, so I had like 3 times in one academic year, I administered surveys. But besides that, I also collected daily diary data. So what does this mean? It means that in January, across 2 school weeks, every day students received a message on their phone asking whether they could fill in a questionnaire about that specific day. And I, again, had quite a lot of students who were willing to participate. They had to be 13 years or older by Finnish law, but also usually those older kids do have phones. Yeah, also a big sample, like 1,700 children almost who participated here. And having this perspective, this victim's perspective, is rather new. So if I really wanted to understand whether it helps them to be defended, I needed to create some new measures, some new measure instruments to assess a victim's perspective of whether they were being defended, because that did not exist until now. So that's what I did. I had some items about the bully-oriented ways of defending, like really saying stop to the bully, or even somewhat more aggressive ways, like pushing the bully away. That was also in there. Also victim-oriented ways of defending, like comforting the victim. And also something that we usually with anti-bullying programs try to stimulate is asking help from teachers. In a survey, I had to administer these items that I created among all students. And then I had to ask it more generally. So it was not only about bullying, but whether the past few months when somebody was mean to you or bullied you, did someone defend you by saying stop to the bully? That's an example. And then they could say yes, no, or not applicable because nobody was mean to me or bullied me. I had to do that. I had to administer it among everybody because our administration system could not have like trigger questions extensively. So yeah, this was what I had to do. It was not ideal. But I think that we found some ways to work with this. In the daily diary study, I only administered the questions about being defended among the students who said that they had been victimized that specific day. But we will come back to that later as well. But then I had at least the selection, like only if you're victimized, then you respond about defending. So this created, of course, a lot of nice data, new data based on new measures. And I think that it might be interesting to just explore some numbers, first of all, to get started. And I would also be interested in hearing your opinion. As I said, I also would like to have some interaction here, because we often assume, right, that bullying is a group process where bystanders are present. But now with my new data, I had some look at that. And I'm wondering, like, how often do you think that bullying is a group process? Like, if you had to put a percentage to it, like in how many percent of the bullying situation there are actually bystanders present? What does your experience say, or your gut feeling? I'm seeing already some numbers emerging. Some people think that in 50% there are bystanders present, or 80, 60, over 50, 60, at least 40. I can say you're pretty close. Here there's someone with 30%, 75%. So there are like differences. And that's actually funny because it really also depends on how you ask it. So if you ask it on a daily level, like if you ask students in these daily diaries, like, okay, you have been victimized, have there been bystanders today? Then in 35% of the days that students say, yes, I have been victimized, there were bystanders present. So only 35% of the days. On 65%, nobody was there, apparently, which I found quite surprising because we often say like bullying is a group process. But if you look at the survey data, then students have to reflect on the past couple of months. And then about 80% of the students, 75 to 80% of the students said, yes, there was a bystander who either helped me or joined the bullying. So this really shows that maybe not every day there are bystanders present, but if you really ask students to reflect, and yeah, if they look back on different days, then yeah, 80% of the students say that there was a bystander present. And maybe just a nice fact, or well, it's not so nice, but students report on average more than 3 bullies. So that's quite a lot, right? So that also, of course, already indicates that bullying is a group process because it often contains multiple bullies. Another question, looking forward to your ideas again. How often are victims of bullying being defended by their peers? Again, you can name any percentage that comes to mind or well, that you think might be most viable. see, 15, 10 to 15, 20, 25, 15, 30, 15. Okay, 20. I think this will surprise you then. At least based on my data, I could say that the percentage might be a bit higher. So if there are witnesses, if you look at the daily diary data, on days that there are bystanders or witnesses present, in about 50% of these days, bystanders decide to defend the victim. So 50% of the days, that's pretty, yeah, pretty nice. Across months, so again, if students reflect back, about 75% of the victimized students said that a bystander tried to help them, either by providing support or by really standing up against the bully. So that's a pretty high percentage, right? And some other things that might be interesting is that students are often helped or defended in various ways simultaneously. So they reported on average like 3 types of defending that peers tried to help them. And on average, students were nominated 2 defenders. So I also asked them like, who defended you in your class? And on average, they had like 2 defenders. Maybe this is also interesting. So I asked about different types of defending. So this helped me to really see like, okay, but what is most often happening? Well, and most often students indicate that they are being defended because their peers tried to defend them in a victim-oriented way. So they tried to defend, to comfort them, or they were friendly to the victim. Like that was most common. There was one bully-oriented way of defending that was pretty common as well, which was that bystanders tried to stop the bully. Like 45% of the victims said that the bystanders had tried to do that the past couple of months. So these are the percentages that are based on students who said that they had been bullied. So this is really something what victims report. It's not like defending in terms of mean behaviors. It's really from victims or these students who were exposed to victimization. And maybe one thing that is also remarkable is that asking a teacher for help is not that prevalent, not that common, even though anti-bullying programs really stimulate youth to show this type of defending behaviors. And that even like more aggressive bully-oriented behaviors, like pushing the bully away or becoming angry at the bullies, that is more common than asking a teacher for help. Okay, so the key finding is that victims are quite often defended. Bullying is a group process, but not necessarily every day, as we saw. And maybe this also raises immediately, at least to me, questions like maybe it's also important for anti-bullying programs to target those days that students are alone, when there are no bystanders present. Because apparently on a lot of days they are alone. So how to equip them, how to make sure that they can handle with the bullying if those days occur. And yeah, that's indeed victims of bullying are quite often defended, but it also often occurs in maybe more negative or aggressive ways. So are these really the optimal ways to help victims of bullying? We could question that. Okay, then the third key question, who is being defended? As you now saw from the prevalences, about 75% of the students said like, yes, I have been victimized across the past couple of months, but also there was across these months, there was somebody who defended me. But this means that 1 out of 4 students lacks defenders. So 25%, yeah, may feel a bit abandoned by their peers. And for teachers, it might be really useful to know like who these non-defended students are. And yeah, what kind of characteristics they might have, like how to recognize those children. I already have written a paper based on this, and it has been accepted to the Journal of School Psychology, and it's currently in its final rounds of the press release things, if I'm correct. So yeah, you can all read it if you would be interested. There's also a preprint, but I will shortly discuss the findings. What I did in this study was that I evaluated the role of a lot of victim and victimization characteristics in predicting being defended in victim and bully-oriented base. So I looked at the victimization intensity, like the frequency and the number of perpetrators, but I also looked at victims' adjustment, their psychological, social, behavioral, and cognitive adjustments. So, for instance, whether they had depressive symptoms, whether they used to defend others in the past already, but also whether they were assertive and whether they thought that they could stand up for themselves. So, these are a lot of predictors. I have a big theoretical model in which I try to explain why all these predictors might play a role. I think that all these predictors might affect victims' tendency, or like how victims interpret their situation and their tendency or willingness to seek help on the one hand, because that could define whether you are being defended. If you seek help, you might be defended. But also it may affect bystanders' decision, whether they want to defend or not, or whether they dare it. For that, they should first notice the event, the victimization, and they should interpret it as something that they should intervene on. And they also often are known to make a cost-benefit analysis. So maybe it is safer to defend a popular peer or someone with a lot of friends as compared to a less popular peer. So to really read all the rationales behind my predictors, you can read the full paper. But I have put them all in the equation to predict being defended in bully-oriented ways or being supported, so the defending in victim-oriented ways. And I was wondering, like, yeah, what is most important? Well, for being defended in bully-oriented ways, I found that students who have more friends, who are more popular, but also who are more assertive themselves, or at least believe that if they would be bullied, they could stand up for themselves, they are more likely to be defended by their peers. So basically, those who are doing well are defended, whereas those who have fewer friends or who are unpopular or who don't believe so much that they could stand up for themselves, they are less likely to be defended. And then with regard to the victim-oriented defending, so the receiving support or comfort, students who had more psychological problems were less likely to receive this support. And if they had more friends, they were more likely to receive this support. But if they had fewer friends, they were less likely to receive support. So again, yeah, if they were emotionally, socially vulnerable, they were less likely to receive support. Girls and younger children were more likely to be defended and to receive support than boys and older children. So based on this study, you could say that those who actually need it the most, the socially, emotionally vulnerable kids, are less likely to be defended. So I think an important question that we could ask ourselves is, how could students be stimulated to also defend these victims of bullying? Okay, then the fourth key question. Can bystanders stop bullying? What do you think? Any ideas? Oh, I already showed the answer. I wanted to click on comments. I see a yes, a no. Yeah, but I already showed the answer, guys. No, yeah. Oh, a yes. No, but ultimately depends on the situation. It depends. Yes, sometimes. Okay, I will release you from your suffering. The short answer is no. Yeah, so I will, of course, tell a bit more about that. But I have tested this very extensively in a registered report, actually. So a registered report is a study in which you first write out your full plan, so your introduction and your method, and then you send it into a journal. And then people will look at your plan, like reviewers, and they could like comment on it. And then if it's approved, only then you start to collect your data and do the plan and start doing the analysis, etc. So this is a registered report, which is pretty new in the field of development psychology. And hopefully it will be out soon. It has been accepted. So what we did here is that we examined whether bystanders can stop bullying. At least that was one of the questions. And one of our goals was initially to compare the effectiveness of different types of bully-oriented defending also. Because like I said, this aggressive bully-oriented defending, like pushing the bully away or even taking revenge on the bully, was quite prevalent in my data. So I wanted to know, like, is this also something that could actually stop bullying? Or maybe it's extra dangerous? As compared to maybe when people just together try to stop the bully and say stop. I wanted to do that, but I then did a factor analysis, and that is a fancy thing to just see like how strong are the responses of the students related to each other. So if they respond that they were defended in aggressive ways, were they also more likely to respond that they were defended in non-aggressive ways? And it was, it really needed to be merged together. It was like a correlation of 0.95 or so. So I actually needed to create one scale out of this. So I could not compare that, even though I would have been really interested in that, but I was basically measuring the same thing, apparently. So I wanted to examine the role of bully-oriented defending in changes in victimization. I did not only distinguish between whether students were defended by at least one peer or not defended, but I also wanted to know the effect of the number of defenders. Like maybe the more people who defend you, the more likely it is that the bullying will stop. And I had 3 time points, as you might remember. So I really wanted to see whether those who are victimized at the first time point, whether they really change in their victimization from the first to the second time point. And those who are victimized at the second time point, whether they change in their victimization from the second to the third time point. So it was a quite thorough testing, but my analyses laid in change score models, they showed that being defended was unrelated to changes in victimization. And this finding was similar, irrespective of whether I looked at different types of being defended. It was the same for the categorical indicator, whether you were defended or not, versus the number of defenders, and it was consistent across time points. And I also evaluated interactions effects with gender and age, but there were no interaction effects or only inconsistent ones. So in general, you could say that bystanders cannot stop bullying. But then I was thinking like, maybe not every bystander can stop bullying, but maybe bystanders who have like a central position in their peer group or who are popular, they might have the power, right, to stop the bully. At least I hoped I would find that. If you want to examine that, you need social network analysis. You should target defending as a network. So I have a picture here to show you what I mean. The gray dots represent pupils, and some of the gray dots are students who are victimized, like the dot 14. I hope it's still visible on your screen. But dot 14 sends out 3 nominations. So he has like 3 defenders. They are related. Yeah, this dot 14 is related to 3 defenders. That's basically the network. Number 7, 15, and 18. And even a defender like number 15 is also apparently been victimized. And that victim is also defended by other peers in that class. You also see that this is a scarce network because a lot of children are not being victimized. So then they are also not being defended. And with this network analysis, you can really see whether the popularity matters. Like it really matters who defends you, whether that affects your future victimization. And I did this in a social network study with Stephanie Richters. We have just submitted the paper, so let's see what the reviewers think about it. But what we found here, so we wanted to answer the question whether the effectiveness of defending in reducing victimization may depend on defenders' popularity, but also on the victim's popularity? And the short answer was no. Even the popular students did not seem to be able to stop the bullying. But I have to say that, like you saw, the networks, they are very sparse. So they're just a few relationships, and it's really hard to estimate such models like social network analyses. So we didn't have, convergence as we had wished for. So the fourth key finding of today is that bystanders cannot stop bullying, at least it seems so. We found in one of the studies that the defended victims and non-defended victims, they both decreased in victimization, but equally strongly. So the defending did not help to make a stronger decrease. And even popular defenders did not seem to stop the bullies. And I did not mention that, but for the Solid project, I also collected some teacher information, and I asked teachers to fill in a questionnaire. And there I also asked teachers about their belief whether bystanders can stop victimization. And about 100 teachers responded to this questionnaire, and 85% of them says, well, maybe sometimes or a little bit, especially the largest percentage said only a little bit. So maybe that also shows that teachers are aware, like, yeah, of course, the defending, it may help, but maybe that's also a reason why we didn't find it here. It's just slightly. But then another question, defending is maybe not only shown because students want to diminish the victimization or stop the bully. They may also want to make the victim feel better, right? They want to show, like, this is not accepted, we care about you. So does defending actually make victims feel better? There are some theories that suggest that this might be the case. Stress buffer theories of social support, or the transactional theory of stress and coping, they really emphasize the social context, the social context is very important in defining how you respond to stress. Well, victimization is a stressor, it can raise stress. But if you have support, it can affect your primary appraisal. So the stress, you may perceive it as less threatening, less challenging because you have support. And secondary appraisals, that's about how you think you can cope with the stress. So if you have people who help you, well, you might also think that you can cope with the situation better. So therefore, defending might make you feel better. But there's also some other research, and that questions whether defending is always making victims feel better. Because maybe, for instance, if you're being defended, maybe you start to depend a bit on your defender. You will start to question yourself, like, maybe I cannot stand up well enough for myself. I need this defender, this peer who helps me, otherwise I'm nothing. Or maybe if you're being defended and it doesn't help, as we saw in the previous, it doesn't stop the bullying, maybe the bully feels like, I can even increasingly ridiculize you, and it's funny, and like, maybe the situation gets worse and you feel worse. So there are also theoretical reasons that have been recently proposed that why defending could work adversely. So it is an important question to check. So I examined this both with the daily diary data and with the survey data to really have both a short-term perspective. Do victims feel better on days that they are being defended than on days that they are not defended? And on the long term, so do victims or students who have ever been victimized the past 3 months and defended develop fewer psychological problems than those who were victimized but never defended? The Daily Diary study has been published. You can easily look it up. I cite it here. And there I found evidence that on the short term, victims feel better on days that they are defended than on days that they are not defended. So defending is good on a daily basis. They really have a better mood, and they also blame themselves less for the victimization on the days that they are defended. as compared to days that they are not defended. So it also helps them in their cognitions, basically. Then with the survey data, I also wanted to examine whether this over the longer term has a beneficial effect. Do defended victims develop fewer psychological problems than non-defended victims? And there I only detected some small benefits. In the first study that I show you here, the 2023 study, I found that defended victims had a bit more the feeling that they were included in the classroom. They felt a bit more like they belonged to the classroom than non-defended victims. And in the other study that I show below, I found that if students ask teachers for help, if that is the way that students defend victims, then the victims had a bit better psychological adjustment. So they had felt less lonely and had a bit more self-esteem as compared to, but that was not the most robust effect. So it was not across all waves. So it was limited because I had a lot of outcomes like depression, social anxiety, like a lot of things that I examined in these studies. So yeah, you could say there are maybe some small benefits, but it seems to be very limited. I have also to say that cross-sectionally, so at the same time point, I found that defended victims are better adjusted than non-defended victims. So at that time point, they are doing better. But over time, I did find limited beneficial effects. So why might there not be a longitudinal role? Well, it could be that if you're being defended, the effect, the beneficial effect happens instantly. And that might have been shown in the daily diary. So maybe like asking or looking at the effect like 3 months later, maybe that's not so meaningful, or it's maybe harder to really find an effect. It could also be that there were ceiling effects, because maybe you remember from the third key point, those who are better adjusted are also more likely to be defended. So maybe, the benefits, they did not have much more room maybe to improve. It could also be that, for instance, I will not mention them all, the defending is enacted in suboptimal ways. Maybe not all children know how to defend your peers in the most socially accepted ways. And also, it is important to emphasize that it is not a randomized controlled trial. As I said, the defending is not randomly distributed. There is already some dependence in whether you are being defended or not. To conclude, defending is quite prevalent, which is maybe something that a lot of anti-bullying programs would be happy with, because that is also what they target. But socially, emotionally vulnerable youth, those who need it the most, are often not defended. It seems that the defending cannot really put an end to the bullying, but it at least can elevate victims' psychological plight a bit. And defendants themselves most often reap social emotional benefits. So for defendants themselves, it's also more likely to be beneficial than risky. So what about future directions? What new studies might be necessary to better understand the benefits of being defended? Well, I would be very interested in conducting a study in which I take the perspective of the bullies. I'm really interested in learning why being confronted with the defending of peers does not stop them. Like, why do they pursue their behavior? Also, I would be interested to examine the effectiveness of defending for different types of victimization. Like, what if you're being victimized in a physical way, if people really push you, or if people gossip about you? Maybe these different types of victimization also need different types of defending behaviors, including cyber victimization. We don't know too much about what kind of defending behaviors are prevalent in the cyber context, or most important or most beneficial according to victims in the cyber victimization context. Also, maybe reveal the consequences of defending for youth in more vulnerable positions. those with learning difficulties, or in minority groups. And also to examine the consequences of defending for defenders from a network perspective. So I would be really interested to have like a study of housing et al. Was the one that really found support for the retaliation hypothesis that bullies start to target the defenders of their victims. And I think that we need at least also more work using these social network analyses, because then we really know like by what bullies you might still be targeted, even if on a mean level you will not be targeted more or so. There might still be people who are chasing you, basically. So I would be really interested in that. So I think comments. So this is, I think, yeah. So this was my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will now have time for questions and further discussion.
Well, thank you so much for such a very wonderful, really clear, well thought out presentation, over the last hour. I have to say, I've read some of your work, and I really appreciated, I think you kind of very clearly telling us a bit about your findings in ways that were easily digestible, and I think very applicable. So very well done, and thank you so much. Um,
Thank
so at this point, we do have a bit of time to sort of discuss and ask any questions. We do have some questions that came in before the presentation, and then for anyone else that has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or feel free to either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we can go through questions that way. Hopefully, Lydia, you're noticing all of the thank yous and all of the
Oh,
positive
yeah.
comments in the
Thank
chat. I think everyone echoes my thoughts on the spectacular research and presentation.
Thank
Um,
you.
so, I had one thought throughout the presentation, so maybe I can kind of kick us off. And I do apologize. My computer knocked me off for about 10 minutes, so I missed about 10 minutes of your presentation. So hopefully my question is not a repeat of something that you said. But one of the things that really spoke to me was the differences between what your research found in the percentage of students who reported being defended, and then our estimates, right, of how
Right.
often, there's quite a discrepancy with that. And I do wonder, and I guess I wondered your thoughts too about that. If you had any other thoughts about that higher prevalence, that I think it was like 50 to 75%, just sort of depending on how you measured it, that said they were defended. Do you think that would generalize across, different countries? Do you think that is specific to your sample? I'm just wondering if you had any more thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a very relevant question. And you are not tapping into something that I already discussed. So
Okay,
that's
good. That's
yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. It also puzzled me a bit because there is some work that showed that only 20% of the victims indicate that they were being defended. There's some other work like Osino and colleagues of 2011 that also found like about 70% of the victims who said that they were defended. So then my work is not so similar, but there are apparently some, yeah, variations in the literature. And then the question is like, what may have caused that? I think that one factor that may have caused that is who you ask. Because the studies that have these lower percentages, they often ask students to nominate peers as defender, for instance. And then 20% of the peers is being nominated as defender, for instance. And that might also then include like, yeah, non-victims and like everybody. And maybe that is not. I also checked in my study, I also have this kind of nomination question. and then you ask students to nominate like who is usually defending, then about 40% is nominated as a defender. So then it's also maybe, yeah, a bit less. So this is really out of those who are being victimized, their perspective. And maybe it is also because then if you really ask victims for their experiences, it's also the things that are less visible that are now exposed. So if you only focus on the bully-oriented defending, it is about 55% or so of the students who. So then, yeah, it really shows that it's really a matter of perspective. Another factor could definitely be cultural. I fully agree with that, or maybe like international differences in anti-bullying program use, because indeed in Finland there's this big emphasis on activating bystanders, but maybe in other countries or other cultures, this is less appropriate or common. So then, yeah, I could definitely imagine that that might also play a role.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much. So we do have a question in the chat from Hannah. So Hannah says, thanks for the presentation. You found small positive psychological changes for victims through defending by asking a teacher for help. Have you found anything more about the teacher's role in bystanding outcomes? Or do you have any future directions, ideas for incorporating the teacher into the bullying prevention as a group process?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting questions and very relevant. With regard to teachers' role in bystanding outcomes, I assume that you mean for the bystander then? At least I hope that I understood it well. I have not examined that, but I would be very interested to see whether maybe you defend someone and later the teacher emphasizes like, yes, this is a situation that needs to be stopped. Like if there's like a double defending, like from peers and the teacher, whether that might be beneficial. And also I will check your other question. Any future directions or ideas for incorporating the teacher into the bullying prevention as a group process? Well, what we also do in Finland now, and what I would love to investigate for effectiveness, is that if teachers come aware of a victimization incident and a repeated victim, that then they are asked to create a support group, a peer support group for this victim. This peer support group is being requested whether they can like defend the victim if something occurs, or whether they can come to the teacher if they feel like the victim is in need of help. So in this way, the teacher and this peer support group, they have a lot of interaction. The teacher might even talk about specific ways that the victim might be especially helped. So in this way, the teacher might affect the bully dynamics of the peers by really saying like, okay, these are the supporters. And of course, already like finding out who might be good supporters for the victim is already, I think, an important task then for teachers. Like what kind of characteristics should these supporters have? So I think that would also be a very important thing for the future to really see like how effective is a support group. We know that from other work in the Dutch context, it's not always effective. So that really shows that maybe we need to learn more about how teachers could, use this support group to influence the peer dynamics.
Thank you so much for that question. I do have another question that came in, and maybe a little bit of a follow-up to that question. Before I ask that, I did just want to note that Bree has put in the link to the feedback and evaluation survey. So just take a note of that. If in case you have to log off a couple minutes early, that link has been in the chat. But I do wonder, about like teacher intervention in itself. So like the teacher doing the right, like if a teacher's the bystander, what sort of behavior and actions, as opposed to the teacher sort of like expecting or teaching or reinforcing students to engage in defender behavior. So I don't know if you had thoughts on that, and it's kind of related to this next question, just about like teacher protocols when bullying is witnessed or reported. And so this question is, protocols are in place in some schools around the world for what teachers and administrators are supposed to do if a child reports being bullied. Can such protocols reduce bullying? Is research available about this? So I guess just I'm not being super clear right now, but if you just had some some thoughts about kind of that piece of like teacher intervention, or clear and specific protocols for what teachers are supposed to do when they witness bullying. Any thoughts or ideas for research in that area?
Yeah. So maybe I can indeed start with the more general picture that a lot of schools they use anti-bullying programs to adhere to the protocols. And we know that there are a lot of anti-bullying programs out there, but not all anti-bullying programs are effective.
Mhm.
So that is something that we know. And the Kiva program, for instance, is an example of an effective anti-bullying program. But there are still a lot of programs out there that are sold to schools with very nice advertisements and nice stories. And then, yeah, they are bought and then they are implemented, but schools don't know if they work. Then the effectiveness of a lot of anti-bullying programs also really depend on how they are being implemented. We also showed that the Kiva schools, yeah, that it was only effective if it was really implemented as intended. So that's, I think, overall, like in terms of the anti-bullying programs, that if you need a protocol, please rely on the effective anti-bullying programs that are out there. Then with anti-bullying programs are often big programs, so they consist of several elements and several elements of what teachers can do. So that relates a bit more to what you were asking about, Stephanie, like what could teachers do? And often they do involve classroom lessons that are more preventive, and their teachers can talk about what bullying is and how students in general could stand up for victims, and they do role plays, for instance. But there are also more targeted elements in these interventions, and that is that teachers really work with the victimization cases that come to their attention. And I also did some research on what really works with these targeted interventions, like what should teachers really do when a bullying case comes to their attention and when they talk to the perpetrators. Should they punish the perpetrators, or should they try to create empathy for the victim, or should they do both? And in a recent study, I found that it's best to do both. So really set clear limits to the behavior. Also try to raise some empathy for the situation of the victim, because that's helped to diminish the bullying for, I think it was about 88% of the victims. But it was only on the short term. So on the longer term, it did seem that there was more needed to really maintain these successes, so across the school year. So I hope this answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So we had a couple other questions come in. So Tim says, thank you for your presentation. It was very clear. Although defenders can't stop bullying, you found psychological benefits for victims. Any thoughts or knowledge of current research on methods for increasing students' likelihood to be defenders? He also says this question might also be somewhat related to the NABIT program, which is a bystander intervention program that Dr. Amanda Nickerson has created.
Nice. Yeah, that's an important question because it is very relevant to know for practice, like what can we do to activate these defenders, and especially because we also know that defenders most likely tend to defend their friends or the socially emotionally well-doing kids. Um, in the paper that I've been writing, I had one suggestion for that is based also on the Kiva program, because in the Kiva program we do have a game in which students can kind of practice to defend each other, but then by providing like rewards to each other and like targets. And so we thought like if we would make sure in this game to say that they should really think like who deserves the defending now the most, or who is most in need of the defending, that you stimulate children more to really think like, okay, maybe I should not immediately think of my friends to provide these tokens to, but maybe somebody else. Or so that is something that we were thinking that could be incorporated too. Because I think that in general, what you don't want is, for instance, a classroom discussion. And so that's what you don't want, a classroom discussion where teachers say like, okay, so who do you think is most vulnerable? And okay, make sure you defend that person. That's of course not what you want. So it has to be in very subtle ways. So either with these games by really activating the thoughts of students themselves, or maybe with the support group that I have been talking about, because then it can be more private, that the teacher just talks to people, to children that they really trust and that they think they could take on the responsibility, like, yeah, you can maybe take care of this peer. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we have another question that came in from Francisco. So he said, there's that new concept to promote in schools, defend the defender, and developing the upstander network as a social capital to reduce bullying, especially for marginalized, othered, and or LGBTQ students. Are those concepts being implemented in Finland or through Kiva or Oveus? And I'm not sure if those concepts are familiar at all to you, Lydia. And if not, I don't know if Francisco, if you wanted to unmute and talk about them a little bit more, if there's
Well,
specific
thank
aspects.
you. Thank you, Dr. Lalawi, for such a fantastic presentation. The concepts were presented at the World Anti-Bullying Forum in June, for me for the first time. I think Fernando from Chile and her colleague talked about that this is the 6D, the 5Ds of so he's adding this 6D, and I found it very, very interesting, because it is he explained the sociological aspect and the Adlerian psychology side of building up my resiliency through making my team of peers, of defenders, and as a bystander, joining in defending. But he does. I remember he specifying that there has to be a commitment of the school to promote that, everybody's being watched, and you'll have consequences if and I'll defend you. I won't stand. So and comes along also with the circle of bullying, of educating everybody, parents, faculty, etc. But he does believe in it, and I thought it was wonderful. So I think that's enough. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for explaining it a bit more. And I think that I know of some similar projects, at least in the Netherlands, and that these are also kind of supportive social capital networks for students with, marginalized students, also the LGBTQ students, especially because they may not have a lot of peers to relate to in terms of their experiences. And they wanted to make sure that they do feel like there is a community that also is willing to stand up for them, but also stand up for each other. Like it's, so I know about some initiatives there. In Finland, I'm not so aware of whether it's at least not part of, like, indeed there is like a lesson in, or multiple lessons in Kiva, like discussing, being tolerant to people with different opinions or different ways of living, or different ways of how they look, or anything. So more broadly, but not as specifically this type. And I really like that it is so also supported by the school. So that would be really something interesting to look at more.
Great, thank you. We have just a couple minutes left. I know that a couple questions came in a little bit related to cyberbullying, and I wasn't sure if you included or measured any aspects of like cyber defending or asked any of that in any of your current work, or if you have any thoughts on maybe how your findings might differ in, more digital spaces, or ideas for future research, or just kind of any of your thoughts as it relates to cyberbullying in your work.
Yeah, very relevant topic also, cyberbullying, because it's becoming increasingly prevalent. So it would really make sense to also examine these constructs and ideas in this area. Unfortunately, I do have a question about cyberbullying, but I don't have questions about cyber defending. So in my study, I have not focused on it, but I think that it is a very important topic. And I could imagine, but we'll see in the future, that maybe comparable effects may emerge. That cyber defending may not necessarily be effective in stopping the cyberbullying, at least that I could imagine. When, for instance, you're on Instagram and you see comments being posted towards each other, and people stand up for each other, like, oh, but I do like this opinion, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's often going forth and back, and it's not necessarily stopping the harassment. But maybe it does at least make those who are being subjected to cyber aggression, like the more public cyber aggression I'm now talking about, maybe it makes them feel better, at least, to have people picking their sides. So I could imagine that maybe similar things would come up. But yeah, that remains an hypothesis.
Yeah, so interesting. And it's interesting to think, I really liked in your study how you separated sort of the bully oriented, right, defending, and then sort of victim oriented. So that would be really interesting to see, if those concepts would play
Yeah.
out similarly or not, as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And also
Yeah.
in terms of words, like what might be the best words to use, or so to be make it like very friendly but still like clear defending, that people will accept, and that then they will think like, okay, I will stop doing this. Like, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for your presentation today. You have such high quality, really rigorous studies and work in this area. I know that I will continue to follow your work. And so thank you again for spending the last, over an hour.